This is the Junction, located over here in the west side of Toronto. As usual, we'll start over in the northern portion of the neighborhood and make our way around from there. Over here, making up the northern border of the neighborhood, is the very major street of St. Clair Avenue West, which has streetcar tracks running along it until about here, where they diverge from the road. St. Clair contains really large, big box retail stores along it, right over here in this purple patch, which, as you can see, stretches a ways back from the road. Now a typically great shopping area directly adjacent to a large mall right across St. Clair just outside of the neighborhood. This area certainly wasn't always this way. It used to be stockyards, as is sort of established by Old Stockyards Road, which cuts through to rejuvenated territory. As you venture further west along St. Clair, you'll reach a somewhat cluttered area, which is more or less occupied by car repair shops of sorts, right along the street. Broadly speaking of industry, there's certainly a lot of that here in various forms, particularly in the northern portion of the neighborhood, more or less everywhere shown in dark gray. Also, for the most part historically stockyards, this area is now generally made up of loading areas and seemingly cars and trucks which had seen better days, among other things. It's more or less just a big, ugly patch of rundown gray which serves the undazzling yet important role of industry. That being said, a quite sizable part of what's there is just down and out urban decay and or apparently wasted, inefficiently used land, which at some point is sure to be revitalized in one form or another, just as the now big box retail section that we touched on has been. Historically, this part of the Junction, although not exclusively, resembled the gritty working class vibe that the neighborhood has been somewhat synonymous with, predominantly in past times. The orange visible over here in the midst of all that is mainly the location of a few relatively unflashy homes, for the most part. Similar as to south of the train tracks, over here, as well, just north of the train tracks, right near Runnymede Park over here, is also made up of similar dynamics. With reference to the train tracks, they make up much of what this area is known for. In fact, where it gets its name, the Junction, is from the convergence of all these major rail lines, joining into one right over here, around the eastern border of the neighborhood, which is kind of interesting. Over here, just below the junction of train tracks, right in the southeast corner of the neighborhood, is another junction of sorts, this time in the form of streets, seeing as over here is pretty much a six-way intersection made up of Old Weston Road, Annette Street, which makes up the southern border of the neighborhood, as well as DuPont, which ends and morphs into Dundas, the last and largest street in this equation. Dundas stretches along through the heart of the neighborhood and is certainly a focal point of the area, seeing as it is and was also in past times the main shopping strip of the neighborhood. Throughout the Junction's contrasting sort of boom and bust history, this strip was just about a mainstay the whole way through. This is where many stockyard workers and others traditionally would go in past times to mingle and, in addition to other things, grab a pint of beer and hang out at local pubs and taverns. But then apparently, the behavior of the workers got really bad, and so they banned alcohol for 97 years. Nowadays, this stretch is quite hip and trendy, and much of it is occupied with old and restored eclectic buildings that make for an overall pretty great vibe and generally contribute to the already excellent shopping experience most of the way throughout. Dundas is also a component of what is perhaps the most notable intersection in the neighborhood, or maybe the second most notable, actually, since it's kind of hard to beat out that cool six-way one. This intersection is with Keele Street over here, which is a very major street that pretty much cuts right through almost all the neighborhood's diversity of areas. Just to the south of this vibrant district, shown in light blue, is a general area predominantly made up of nice, decently large, quite desirable homes along lovely tree-lined streets. Those mostly very nice places offer an enviable quality of life and, among other things, are great for raising a family. That is, if you can afford it, which you probably can't because, it's Toronto prices. Another draw to this area is that, as well as being right near most everything else that we've discussed, it's pretty close to this great, big, famous, amazing park, which is High Park. We'll talk about that more in another video. Speaking of family, if, God forbid, something was going to happen to someone in your family and you lived over here, then there's a hospital right here. So, yeah. This place goes by the name of Runnymede Hospital, which is of a pretty decent size and sits just on the east side of Runnymede Road, which makes up the neighborhood's western border. Just to the east of that, on the whole decently affluent light blue patch that we just discussed, is this area shown in yellow, which contains homes mostly of a somewhat similar dynamic to the ones just west, although the homes here tend to be smaller for the most part, which certainly does make a difference in itself. This area contains the schools of both the Great Lakes College of Toronto, as well as Lucy McCormick's Senior School, which stretches from Dundas to Annette when those streets are still in close corridors with each other. There's also some more schools not too far south of the neighborhood, some virtually just across Annette. Alright, so overall, in conclusion, from unappealing gray industry to nice homes along tree-lined streets, this neighborhood has a lot of diversity in areas. It has been known for its somewhat turbulent boom and bust industrial history and bearing the brunt of a perhaps disproportionate amount of circumstances in comparison to other areas. It thrives in good times and struggles in bad times, and right now, it's mostly thriving.